The transport shuttle hit the landing pad so hard that two of the alien cadets inside it stumbled and snarled. Rena Hollis did not stumble. She had been holding the strap above her head for the last 6 minutes because she had counted the descent and knew exactly when the impact would come. The other cadets did not notice. They were too busy showing off their teeth. The door hissed open and a wall of dry heat hit her face. 3 suns burned in the sky outside, all of them at different angles, painting the world in colors that did not belong together. Orange, red, pale green. The landing pad was made of black glass, and it shimmered under those 3 suns like the surface of a frozen lake that had been set on fire. Rena stepped out last, on purpose. She wanted to see the others first. There were 40 cadets in her intake. Most of them were taller than her by at least a head, and some were taller than her by twice that. One had armored plates running down its spine. Another had 4 arms and a long, slow tail. A third looked like a standing crocodile wearing a soldier's harness. They all turned to stare at her the moment her boots touched the glass. A laugh ran through the formation. Low, ugly, and pleased. Rena kept her face still. Her father had taught her that. Never let them see what you are thinking, he used to say, especially when you are afraid. And she was afraid. She would have been a fool not to be. But fear was a thing she had carried before, on long mountain hikes with low food, on cold winter nights when the power had gone out, on the day her mother had died. Fear was an old friend by now. She knew how to walk beside it. A heavy shape moved through the formation, and the cadets parted for it without being told. The instructor was huge, even by Vorlith standards. His skin was the color of dark stone, and his shoulders were wider than Rena's whole body. He wore a black uniform with one red mark across the chest. When he stopped in front of her, his shadow covered her completely. "You are the experiment," he said. His voice was deep and flat, like a hammer hitting wet sand. Rena looked up at him. "My name is Rena Hollis. Your name does not matter. You will be dead in a week." He turned to the others without waiting for her to answer. "This human has been forced upon us by treaty. You will not waste rations on her. You will not waste medical attention on her. You will not waste your time helping her stand when she falls. She will fall, and then she will be sent home in a small box, and we will continue our work." The cadets laughed again. The crocodile one made a sound that might have been a cheer. "My name is Drask Vol," the instructor went on. "I am your trial master. You will learn to fear me, and then you will learn to obey me, and then, if any of you survive, you will be warriors of the Dominion. We do not train soldiers here. We train conquerors. Worlds will burn under your hands. Worlds will kneel before your boots." He paused, and his black eyes moved back to Rena. "Worlds," he said, "will not kneel before this." Rena did not answer. She filed his name away the same way she filed the position of the suns, the distance to the gate, and the smell of the air. Hot metal, burning oil, something sharp underneath it that she could not name yet, but would. They were marched into the academy on foot. It was not really a building. It was a mountain that had been carved into a fortress, kilometer after kilometer of black corridors and open training grounds and pits that went down so deep she could not see the bottom. The other cadets were given heavy boots, armored chest plates, and bone grip weapons fitted to their hands. Rena was given a thin gray uniform, a single canteen, and a pair of boots 2 sizes too big. She tightened the laces until her feet stopped sliding inside them. Then she stood up and joined the line. The bunk room was a long stone hall with rows of heated platforms instead of beds. The reptilian cadets stretched out on them right away, sighing as the warmth soaked into their cold blood. Rena's platform was at the far end, near a wall that leaked cold air through a crack she could feel from 3 meters away. She sat down on it slowly, took off her boots, and inspected her feet. No blisters yet. Good. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat with her back against the cold wall, and she went over the day in her mind, piece by piece. The number of guards at the main gate, the angle of the suns when they had landed, the way Draskval had stood, weight on his back foot, ready to strike if she had moved wrong. The way the 4-armed cadet had watched her, eyes narrow, already planning something. The smell of the air. She placed the smell at last. It was salt. The wind was coming off Salt Flats somewhere to the east. She knew, then, what the first trial would be. When the morning horn sounded and the cadets rose from their warm platforms, Draskval walked into the bunk room and announced it. A march. No water past the starting ration. No shelter. 200 kilometers across the salt under 3 suns. The cadets laughed when her name was called. Rena bent down and tightened her boots. Salt crunched under 40 pairs of boots as the column of cadets stepped onto the flats at the first hour after dawn. The sound was strange. It was not crunching like snow. It was crunching like glass, sharp and small and angry. Rena listened to it for a moment before she started walking. Her ears were the first tool she had, and she did not waste them. The horizon ahead was flat and white and empty. There were no plants. There were no rocks. There were not even shadows, because all 3 suns were climbing now, and the light came from too many directions at once. The salt threw the brightness back up into the cadets' eyes. By the end of the first hour, 2 of them were already squinting and rubbing at their faces. Rena had tied a strip of cloth across her own eyes the moment they had marched out of the gate. She had torn it from the bottom of her uniform during the night, and she had soaked it in the last of her bunk water before she left. It cut the glare down to a soft gray. The other cadets had laughed at her for it. Now some of them were starting to look at the cloth with quiet, narrow eyes. She did not walk fast. That was the first rule. Her grandmother had walked across desert country in summer when the village wells had failed, and she had taught Rena how it was done. Slow steps, even breath, mouth closed so the air did not steal water from the throat. Sip, do not gulp. And always, always, walk in another body's shadow if you can. The 4-armed cadet named Corvin was the biggest in the column, and he marched near the front, proud of his place. His 4 heavy arms swung as he walked, and his back threw a shadow long enough to cover 2 of Rena's strides. She slid into the edge of it without making a sound. She did not get too close. She did not get too far. She matched his pace exactly and let him do the work of breaking the heat for her. Corvin did not notice her for the first 3 hours. When he did, he turned his great head and snorted. "Little human," he said in the common tongue. "Are you hiding behind me?" "Yes," Rena said. She did not lie. Lying took breath. Corvin laughed, loud and hard. He thought she was joking. The cadets near him laughed too. None of them understood that she had told them exactly what she was doing, and that knowing did not help them. The first cadet fell at the 4th hour. He was a reptile type with bright green scales, and the scales had been the wrong choice for this world. They reflected nothing. They drank the heat in. He sat down on the salt very suddenly, blinked twice, and then lay over on his side without a sound. A skim drone hummed in from the academy and lifted him away. None of the others stopped walking. The second cadet fell at the 6th hour, the third at the 7th. By the time the first sun touched the horizon, 6 cadets were gone. Corvin was still walking, but he had stopped swinging his 4 arms. He was carrying them close to his chest now, and Rena could see the heavy plates on his back going dark with sweat. She drank from her canteen for the first time. 2 small sips. She rolled the second sip around her mouth before she swallowed it. Then she capped the canteen and kept walking. Corvin stopped at the 8th hour. He did not fall. He just stopped, swaying on his thick legs, his great head bent down toward the salt. Rena slid out of his shadow and walked past him without looking. She did not have the water to share, and even if she had, she knew he would not have taken it from a human. She heard the skim drone come for him an hour later. The cool came when the first sun set. It was not real cool, but the air dropped enough that her cracked lips stopped stinging for a while. She used the small mercy to walk faster. The second sun set 2 hours after that, and the third was low and red on her left when she finally saw the marker post in the distance. A black metal pole with a Vorlith glyph cut into the top. The finish line. She walked the last kilometer alone. There was no one ahead of her. There was no one within sight behind her. She crossed the line at the start of the second night. Her face was burned. Her lips were split. Her tongue felt like a stone in her mouth. But her boots were still on her feet, and her boots had not been carried by a drone. Draskval was waiting at the post. He did not speak as she walked up to him. He only watched her, and his black eyes moved over her face and her cracked hands and her steady knees. Rena stopped in front of him. She tried to come to attention, the way the others did, but her body was too tired for it. She just stood. Draskval lifted a small data slate. He looked at it. He looked back at her. Then, with the tip of one heavy claw, he drew a single mark across her file. Rena could not read the Vorlith tongue yet, but she knew the word he had written. Anomaly. She had heard him use it under his breath at the start. He stepped aside without a word. Behind him, The gate of the academy opened. Rena walked through it on her own 2 feet. In her bunk, with the cold wall against her back, she let her eyes close at last and whispered into the dark. One down. The jungle moon hit the eye before anything else did. From the drop pod window, it looked like a green stain across black space, wet and bright, and somehow alive even from orbit. The cadets pressed against the glass as the pods turned, and most of them grinned. This was the kind of trial they had been trained for. A hunt. Something to kill. Rena did not press to the glass. She sat on her bench and looked at the small map slate in her lap. There were no marked paths on it. Only a green circle where she would land, a red circle where the extraction pad was, and a thin blue line of a river between them. The instructors had named the beast, and nothing more. A threat. Bring back its head, or do not come back at all. The pods dropped in a hard, screaming line, and the world outside turned from black to white to wild green. Rena's pod hit the canopy, snapped through branches, and slammed into soft ground. The door blew open. The heat that came in was thick and full of water, and it smelled like things rotting under things growing. Rena did not run out of the pod. She stood in the doorway for a full minute and listened. She heard high calls from somewhere above. Small animals, not afraid. That meant no large predator close. She heard the low hum of insects, steady and even. That meant the air was safe to breathe for now. She heard the river, faint, to her left. She heard nothing that walked on 2 heavy feet, and she heard nothing that hissed. Then she stepped out, and she stepped into the trees. The other cadets did not listen first. She knew that, even though she could not see them. She could hear them. Far off through the green, somewhere to her north, a cadet was already shouting a battle cry, and another was crashing through the brush like a falling building. The crocodile cadet, by the sound of it. He would scare every Thren within 10 kilometers into hiding. Rena went the other way. She went up. She found a tree with deep bark grooves and climbed it slow, one careful hand and one careful foot at a time. She did not climb all the way to the top. Predators looked at tops. She stopped in the thick middle of the tree, where the branches were heavy and the leaves were wide. She wedged herself into a fork and stayed still. For 2 hours she did not move. She watched. She watched the small animals come back to their branches after her climb had scared them. She watched the way the wind pushed the leaves. She watched a line of damp earth at the base of another tree across from her, a line that was darker than the rest. Something heavy had stepped there in the last day. The print was wide and 3-toed and deep at the back. A Thren walked on 3 toes. She had memorized that from the trial briefing. She climbed down on the far side of the tree from the print, so her scent would not cross the path. Then she went to work. Her grandmother had not built snares for Thren. Her grandmother had built them for forest pigs, in the hills above their village, in the years when the markets were thin. The shape was the same. A bent young tree, a notched trigger, a loop of strong vine on the ground. Rena cut the vines with the edge of her belt buckle, which she had sharpened the night before on the stone wall of her bunk. She set the trigger so light that a heavy step would spring it. She covered the loop with leaves. She walked away from it without looking back. Then she climbed a new tree, downwind of the snare, and she waited. She waited a long time. The first day passed. The first night passed. She drank rainwater from a wide leaf at dawn and ate a strip of dried meat from her belt. She did not move except to breathe. On the 3rd day, the Thren came. It came slow and heavy, head low, tusks white against the green. It was bigger than she had pictured, the size of a small car. Its eyes were small and dark, and they did not see her in the high branches. It walked the path her snare was set on because that was its path, the path it had walked 100 times before. It put its front foot down on the trigger. The bent tree snapped up. The vine loop closed around the Thren's back leg and yanked the leg out from under it. The animal screamed, a flat, ugly sound, and went down hard on its side. It thrashed. It tore at the ground. But the vine held, and the loop was high on the leg, where its tusks could not reach. Rena came down from her tree without hurrying. She walked to the Thren's head from behind, where the tusks could not turn. She used the sharpened edge of her belt buckle to cut the great vein in its neck. The Thren went still in less than a minute. She sat down beside it and rested her hands for a while, because her hands were shaking. She dragged the carcass to the extraction pad with 2 cut poles and a long strip of vine, the way hunters had dragged kills for thousands of years on her own world. Two cadets never came back. A bell rang inside the academy at the wrong hour of the night. Not the morning horn. Not the meal call. A single deep bell that hit the bunk room walls and rolled through the stone like a slow wave. The cadets sat up on their warm platforms, and every one of them looked at the same end of the room. The cold wall. The bunk where Rena Hollis slept with her back against the leaking crack. She was already on her feet by the time the bell finished its second ring. She had been awake for an hour. She pulled her boots on over her sore feet and laced them tight. A guard came down the row of platforms. His armor was black. His faceplate was down. He stopped at the end of her bunk and pointed at her with one heavy finger, and then he pointed at the door. "Cage," he said. That was all. The other cadets did not laugh this time. They watched her walk past them in a silence so thick that Rena could hear the steady drip of water from the cracked wall. She heard the four-armed kind whisper something in his own tongue. She did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. He was not mocking her. He was warning the cadet next to him. He was saying, "Watch this." The cage was a round stone pit, 50 meters across, sunk into the floor of the central training hall. A ring of high walls surrounded it. Above the walls, balconies climbed in tiers, and the tiers were full. The whole academy had come. Cadets of every species filled the seats. Instructors stood in clusters on the higher levels. At the very top, in a chair carved out of black stone, Draskval sat with his great hands folded over his knees and his black eyes fixed on the pit floor. Rena walked down a short ramp into the cage. The door behind her slid shut and locked. The lights came up. The thing on the other side of the cage was a Hraxan. She had seen pictures of them in her briefing slates, but pictures had not been enough. It was a bladed insect that walked on two strong back legs, and it stood almost 3 meters tall. Its forearms ended in long, curved blades of natural bone, polished from years of use. Its head was a flat triangle, and its eyes were not eyes. They were two black fields made of 1,000 small mirrors. Each one of them watched her at the same time. A horn sounded above. The Hraxan moved. It came across the pit in 3 long, bouncing steps, faster than anything that size had any right to be. Rena did not try to meet it. She did not even raise the short training spike they had handed her at the ramp. She ran. She ran sideways along the curve of the wall, and the Hraxan's first strike cut the air where her chest had been a moment before. The blade hit the stone wall behind her and threw sparks. She felt the heat of them on her neck. She did not stop running. The pit floor had a thin layer of pale dust on it. Old, dry dust, kicked up by years of fights. Rena had noticed it at the top of the ramp. She had stored it the way she stored everything. She let the Hraxan chase her in a long, flat circle. It came in again, both blades up, and she dropped low at the last second. She slid on her hip across the dusty floor, under the curve of one blade. And as she slid, she swept her hand through the dust and threw a great pale handful straight up into the 1,000 mirrors of its eyes. The Hraxan screamed. Not a roar. A high, broken whistle. Its blade arms slashed at the air in front of its face, blind. Rena was already on her feet behind it. She had the training spike in her hand now. She did not strike at the back. She knew the back was plated. She had seen the diagrams. She had read them for 2 nights straight, sitting against her cold wall under a low lamp, because she had known this fight was coming long before the bell had rung. The seam was under the thorax, between the front legs. A soft strip the width of her thumb. She came in low, under the wild blades, and she drove the spike up into the seam with both hands and all the weight of her body behind it. The point went in. She felt it scrape past something hard and then sink into something soft. The Hraxan stopped screaming. It stopped moving. Its forelegs folded, and it came down on its side with a heavy, wet sound. The cage was silent. Rena stood up slowly. Her shoulder was bleeding from where one of the blades had clipped her on the slide. She was shaking. Her knees did not want to lock. She kept them locked anyway. Draskval came down from the high seat. He walked down the tiers without hurrying, past rows of staring cadets, and he stepped over the rail and dropped the last 2 meters into the pit himself. The stone shook when he landed. He walked to her. He stopped a step away. He did not look at the dead Hraxan. He looked at her, and his black eyes were not angry, and they were not proud. They were something else, something quieter. Somewhere above the dark side of a frozen world, a small metal panel inside Drop Pod 7 was loosened by a gloved hand that did not belong to its owner. The hand worked fast. It pulled 2 wires out of place, bent the navigation ship 3 degrees off true, and slid the panel back into the wall like nothing had ever been touched. Then the hand was gone, and the pod sat in their rack in silence, waiting. Rena Hollis did not know any of that when she climbed into Pod 7 the next morning. She only checked the harness, the way she always did, and she ran her hand along the inside of the door, the way she always did. Her shoulders still hurt from the cage. The med tech had not been gentle, but the wound was clean and the stitches held. The trial briefing had been short. Orbital drop. Frozen continent. Survival zone marked in red. Reach the Academy perimeter on foot. No rescue. No resupply. The pods dropped one by one. Rena's pod started to spin in the upper air. She felt at first as a small wobble, the kind of wobble that should not be there. Then the wobble became a slow turn. Then the turn became a wild, sideways tumble, and the navigation light on her panel went from green to red to dead. She did not panic. She did not have time for panic. She pulled the harness tighter, braced her feet against the floor plate, and tucked her chin down to her chest the way the impact drills had taught her in the first week. The pod hit something. Hard. It bounced. It hit again. It rolled. The world outside the small window was white, dark, and then it was only one long, screaming white as the pod skidded across an ice field on its side. It stopped. For a long moment Rena did not move. She listened to her own breathing. She counted her fingers without looking. 10. She counted her toes inside her boots. 10. She unbuckled the harness and crawled, slow and careful, to the cracked door. The cold hit her like a wall. She knew, before she looked at the sky, that she was not in the survival zone. The light was wrong. The wind was wrong. The mountains on the far horizon were not the mountains from the briefing slate. She was somewhere else. Far north. Maybe a full continent away. No one was coming for her. She did not waste time on the unfairness of it. She turned around and got to work. The pod was wrecked, but wrecked things still had parts. She tore the silver inner lining off the walls and wrapped it around her uniform under the outer layer. She cut a long strip of cushion from the seat and tied it around her head and face, leaving only a slit for her eyes. She broke the casing off the emergency power cell, wrapped it in wire, and used it to melt a canteen of snow into water before its small charge died. She took a sharp piece of the door frame and shoved it through her belt as a blade. She took a longer piece and bent it into a hook. Then she started walking. The wind on the ice was not a wind she had felt before. It did not gust. It pushed, steady and hard, against the same side of her body for hours at a time. She turned her shoulder into it and kept that shoulder there. She walked by the position of the 2 pale moons that climbed above the white horizon at night. The smaller one always rose first. She used it to keep her line. On the second day, she killed a small animal. It was the size of a cat, with thick gray fur and short legs, and it had come too close to her shelter looking for warmth from the dead power cell. She killed it fast with the door frame blade and ate it raw because she had no way to make a fire. She saved the fur and tied it around her hands. On the 4th day, the smaller moon did not rise on time. She thought she was losing her mind for an hour. Then she understood that she had walked into the edge of a long polar night, and the moons were not where they had been. She had to find a new way to keep her line. She used the wind. The wind had not changed. The wind was still pushing on the same side of her face. She turned that side into it again and kept walking. On the 7th day, she fell through a thin crust of ice into a meltwater pocket up to her chest. The cold went through her like a knife. She climbed out, stripped the wet layers, put the silver lining against her skin under her dry layers, and walked through the next 4 hours shaking so hard that her teeth chipped against each other. She did not stop. Stopping was dying. On the 10th day, she saw the black towers of the Academy on the southern horizon. She did not cry. She did not have the water in her for crying. She just kept walking. A dead world has a sound, even though no one wants to call it that. It is the sound of a wind that has nothing left to push against. No leaves, no grass, no animals, only old dust moving across old stone. That sound was the first thing 40 cadets heard when the heavy gates of the gauntlet world rolled open. Rena Hollis stepped out last, on purpose. She wanted to see the others first. The gauntlet world had once been alive. The instructors had told them that much in the briefing chamber. A whole species had built cities here, fought wars here, prayed here, and then died here, all of it long enough ago that no name for any of it had survived. Now the cities were broken stone, and the wars were dust, and the prayers were only the sound of that empty wind. The Dominion used the dead world for one purpose: a final test. Cross it, survive it, come back with your mind still working and your boots still on, and you would graduate. The cadets who fell would not be carried out this time. The drones did not come for the dead on the Gauntlet world. That was the rule. Rena had not trained for combat in the weeks before the Gauntlet. The other cadets had. She had watched them in the practice yards, swinging blades, firing pulse rifles, sparring in heavy armor under the three suns. She had not joined them. She had walked. She had carried weight on her back and walked, hour after hour, around the inside ring of the academy until her boots wore thin and the guards stopped watching her because she was so boring to watch. She had practiced lying still in the cold. She had practiced eating less. She had practiced going without water for longer and longer hours. She had not trained to win the Gauntlet. She had trained to still be there at the end of it. The first day on the dead world killed 3 cadets. Not enemy fire. There was no enemy. The world itself was the enemy. One cadet drank from a clean-looking stream and was vomiting blood by sundown. One cadet pushed his armored body too hard in the dry, thin air, and his great heart simply stopped. One cadet lay down in a ruined building to sleep and never woke up because the air in that building was heavier than the air outside it, and heavier air on this world was poison. Rena had read the briefing slate for 2 nights. She had circled the warnings in her mind. She did not drink from any water that did not run fast and cold over stone. She did not push her pace. She did not sleep below ground level. On the 3rd day, she found Corvin. The 4-armed cadet who had once laughed at her on the landing pad was sitting against a broken pillar, all 4 of his arms hanging at his sides. He had a long gash down one leg. His eyes were open, but they were not seeing well. He looked up when she came around the pillar, and his great mouth moved, but no words came. Rena did not say anything either. She knelt. She cleaned his wound with the last of her boiled water. She tore a strip from her pack and tied the gash shut. She lifted his nearest arm over her shoulder and got him to his feet. He was 4 times her weight. She walked him forward anyway. 1 step. 1 more. 1 more. She found 2 others before the gauntlet ended. The crocodile cadet, half blind from a fall. A small reptile cadet, lost and shaking. She did not leave any of them. She carried what she could. She shared what she had. She walked. On the 9th day, she reached the extraction pad at the far edge of the dead world with 3 living cadets behind her and the wind still pushing dust across her boots. She was the last one standing. Not because she had beaten the others. Because she had refused to die, and because she had refused to leave them behind. The graduation ceremony was held in the great central hall of the academy, under 3 open windows that let the 3 suns pour their light onto the black stone floor. The surviving cadets stood in a line. There were 9 of them. Out of 40. Draskval walked the line. He stopped at each cadet. He pressed the Dominion's mark onto each shoulder with the heavy seal in his hand. When he came to Rena, he did not press a normal mark. He pressed the highest one. Gold, edged in black. The mark given only to cadets the Dominion considered a weapon all on their own. Then he turned to face the watching instructors and warlords on the high tiers, and he spoke in a voice that filled the whole hall. We trained our entire lives to conquer worlds. This one, his great hand rested for a moment, gentle, on Rena's small shoulder. She learned how to survive them. And in the end, that is the greater weapon. The hall was silent for a long count. Then, slowly, one by one, the instructors began to bow their heavy heads. The warlords followed. The cadets followed last. Rena did not bow back. She did not know the custom. She only looked up through the high windows, where the 3 suns were burning together for the first time all season, and she felt the warmth on her cracked face, and she let her eyes close for the first time in a very long while.